When someone talks to me about moving to Mexico, they'll mention culture, food, the beaches, people, but inevitably, a lower cost of living will always come up as a key reason. And it's true. As you saw in our last Mexico video, living in Mérida saved me a whopping $25,000 plus each year. Now, many expats see these savings and think, you know what? I want to lock in this savings and I'm going to buy a house here in Mexico. And I'm here to tell you that buying a property in Mexico is a terrible idea for most new expats. Buying a house here carries a ton of risk, and this risk is especially true if it's your first time living in Mexico. In this video, I'm going to run down the key reasons why new expats should avoid buying a house in Mexico and why renting is a better decision. If you miss out on this video, you might make a decision that will cost you tens of thousands of US dollars in the long run. And make sure you stick around for number 7, because that one's a bloody shocker. So grab a cerveza and let's get started. Hey expats, I'm Marco Sison with Nomadic Fire with another fact-filled video guide to living your best life abroad. We bring you the best updated intelligence on expat life in different cities and countries overseas. With us, you get the unique perspective of having one source to compare, contrast, and catch life in the best retirement hotspots around the world. Here are the 10 reasons why renting is a better choice for expats than buying property in Mexico. First up is a lower initial investment. Renting typically requires a smaller upfront cost than buying. Most rentals only require the first and last month's rent along with a security deposit. Now, depending on the price of your rental, you're talking a few $1,000s. Now, let's take a look at what happens if you're purchasing. You're talking about a significant expense. Besides potentially paying for a real estate attorney to review contracts, you're going to be paying close to 4 to 10% of the home's value in closing costs. And then if you decide to get a home, many Mexican lenders require a 15% down payment, and then there are some lenders even demanding up to 30%. And here's your first insider tip: additional upfront rental costs. Depending on the city you're renting in Mexico, you may also be asked to provide an Aval or a Poliza jurídica. In Querétaro, for example, a Poliza jurídica is common, but in Mérida, an Aval is more likely to be required from you. Now, you may be wondering what these words mean. An Aval or a Poliza are just different ways a landlord or a homeowner can protect their investment. An Aval is typically someone you know in Mexico that owns a home and can be your guarantor in case you stop paying for rent. So if you leave the house in crappy condition, this person's going to be on the hook. Yeah, you may imagine being the new guy that just moved to Mexico and trying to find a local friend willing to put their butt on the line for you like that is going to be pretty hard. Now, a Poliza is a little easier. It's basically an insurance policy that protects both you and the landlord if you don't pay the rent or if you damage their house. Now, the good news is a Politica also protects you as the renter in case the house has any hidden defects or the owner reneges on their portion of the contract. The cost for a policy typically is 10 to 20% of 1 month's rent. If a landlord asks me for an aval, my initial negotiating position is no way. I'm already paying a 1 or 2 month deposit, which should be plenty. But you should be prepared if you find a landlord that's going to be harder to deal with. So if this landlord is going to be hard with the negotiation, might need to look at a different place. If their negotiating position is they're still demanding some sort of insurance or additional deposit, I try to negotiate a Poliza. They're easier than finding someone who's willing to put their property up as a collateral to guarantee that I'll make a payment. Reason number 2, interest rates for home loans in Mexico are ridiculous. If you come from a low interest rate country like the US, you're going to be shocked when you see interest rates for foreigners in Mexico hit 9 to 12%. Now, given that the cities we're living in Mexico, the purchase prices for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath near the city center are around $250,000 to $350,000 US dollars. You're going to be looking at a massive interest payment on your mortgage. Now, I quickly ran the numbers through an online mortgage calculator just to get an idea. And wow, you would not believe I would be paying nearly $800,000 of interest for a 30-year mortgage if I bought a house here. Reason numero 3. Lately, property prices in Mexico have been shooting up much faster than rents. Meanwhile, prices are cooling off in the US, but rents are still climbing. So when you compare the United States and Mexico, Mexico's price to rent ratio is generally lower, which means renting is a pretty good deal in many Mexican cities. For example, Mexico's price to rent ratio sits at around 157, while it's about 135 in the US. And This matches our experience, where we found a one-bedroom and housing in cities like Querétaro, Mérida, and Oaxaca to be much less than the average price of a one-bedroom in the US. And if you want more tips like these, join our Expat Insights Facebook group for your insider's guide to living abroad. Our community is where you connect, share, and discuss real expat life overseas. No clickbait videos or filtered Instagram posts here, just unbiased truth from people who made the leap. Click below to join, because life's too short to wonder, what if? Reason número 4, better flexibility in renting. Renting allows for greater mobility and the opportunity to explore different areas in Mexico before committing to a specific location. We've already done test drives in living in Mérida, Querétaro, and Oaxaca. And this doesn't even count how many times we've changed neighborhoods within a given city once we realized that a specific barrio just didn't fit our lifestyle. Now, you don't get to really change your mind easily as a homeowner. Look at point 10 down below. And here's your next insider tip. Even popular expat hotspots like Mérida isn't for everyone. Now, I know, I get it. No destination is a perfect Goldilocks city for everyone, but this seems especially true for Mérida. People from the US or Canada come here in December or January to escape that dismal, cold winters in the US and think, wow, Mérida is so amazing, let's move here. But they don't realize how ridiculously hot it gets here around May or June. Think about 100% humidity and 100-degree heat in a concrete city with blazing sun and no shade. While I don't have the numbers to back up how many expats leave Mérida, I know enough people to say that the number is not small. And this is not a put down on Mérida. I'm just making a point that renting gives you a lot more leeway to make adjustments if it's your first time living in a new city. If you're a homeowner, leaving just because you can't handle the heat, dust, or noise in Mexico is going to be much more complex. Número 5, less maintenance responsibilities. Renters should not be responsible for repairs or maintenance, which can be a massive strain on the homeowner. Maintenance isn't just a matter of unclogging toilets or tightening leaky faucets. I mean, you're going to need to make major repairs on appliances, you're going to need to fix a leaky roof, or you may need to fix a pool that isn't working properly. As a general rule of thumb, real estate experts estimate annual maintenance costs for a house using 1% of the home's value. For a $250,000 home, that translates to an additional $2,500 of yearly repairs. As a renter, landlords typically handle these issues, allowing you to avoid the stress and unexpected repair costs. Now, notice I said should, because you need to make sure how maintenance is clearly spelled out in your lease agreement. Number 6. In the US, most home buyers argue that mortgage payments are fixed while rents can increase. However, homeowners do not consider maintenance and home repairs. Remember when I said that real estate experts estimate annual maintenance costs to be about 1 to 2% of the home's current value? Well, guess what? As home values increase, so do the cost of repairs. Now, as I mentioned above, renting can mean a lot less hassle. Our rent included weekly housekeeping, pool maintenance, bi-weekly landscaping, and all utilities included except for electricity. And because of the next point below, if you're worried about increasing rental prices, just sign a long-term contract and fix the price. Number 7, rental laws favor the tenant in Mexico. Unlike most US cities, Mexico has much stronger rental protection laws. As long as you keep paying your rent on time and don't violate your lease terms, your landlord cannot kick you out. In the US, breaking a lease usually involves penalties and potential legal fees, but you could theoretically move out at any time in Mexico. Now, you would obviously lose out on your deposit, but the landlord is going to have little recourse in getting you to pay for the rest of the contract. This protection is why many Mexican landlords insist on getting notarized rental contracts or deposits or the Avals or the Poliza jurídicas that I discussed earlier, just to reduce some of their risk. Número 8. Renting is just a less complicated process. Now, this one isn't unique to Mexico. Just like in the US, the rental process is generally much simpler than purchasing a property, which is going to involve lengthy legal and financial procedures. We can find a house to rent, sign a contract, pay the initial fees, and move in the same day. However, the complexity of buying a property in Mexico is much more difficult. Choosing a house and closing on a house is typically measured in weeks or months, not days. Renting allows you to avoid the complexities of buying property and figuring out local real estate laws and regulations in a foreign country where English is not the legal language. And here's another insider tip. Notarios, When it comes time to sign contracts, you may come across the term notario, which sounds very similar to notary. But unlike notaries in the US, Mexican notarios are specialized attorneys with much broader legal authority. They're actually considered kind of quasi-judicial officials in the real estate transactions. A notario here in Mexico is going to authenticate, transact, and record all official property ownership changes. However, while a notario is a real estate attorney, they are not your attorney. Their plan is to stay neutral. So if you want a lawyer that looks after your interests, you're going to need to hire a separate Mexican attorney to review all your real estate transactions and contracts. Number 9, renting is just a better investment. Remember point 3 where I talk about how renting is cheaper than buying? Well, you can take that savings and put it towards your retirement fund or other investments without tying the capital up in real estate. Now, especially if you plan on taking a home loan with 12% interest, you will likely get a much better financial return by saving that big down payment and investing it in S&P 500 ETFs. Remember that 15 to 30% minimum down payment most Mexican banks require on a 30-year home? Well, let's say that down payment was roughly $50,000 US dollars. If you had invested that $50,000 down payment into a simple S&P 500 ETF, you would have over $1 million. And here's the last reason. It's just an easier exit strategy. Selling a home in Mexico is much different than in the US. First of all, there's no MLS-like central database of all available properties for sale, so it's just harder to find properties and buy and sell. Second, in many Mexican states, you don't even need a license to call yourself a real estate agent. This is not like the US or Canada where agents have accreditation and training and licensing. Here, it's kind of literally the wild, wild west. Now, there have been some states in Mexico that have started licensing agents. Still, even the president of the Mexican Association of Real Estate Professionals admits that only 10% of the people who offer real estate services have any proper training, professionalism, or certification to advise on real estate investments. Basically, all of what I just said adds up to a difficulty in selling. The time it takes to sell a property in Mexico is typically measured in months. Now, if your circumstances change, such as your job gets relocated, or you have health concerns, or even it's just personal preferences, if you're a renter, you can just typically end your lease early. However, if you own your home, you could be stuck for months and months paying for a mortgage while looking for a buyer. Look, I get it. Retiring in Mexico sounds terrific. You're already counting the money you're saving and tasting the pork carnitas taco juice dripping off your chin. But moving here is not a decision you make blindly. Renting in Mexico gives you better financial flexibility, more financial protection, and peace of mind that new expats need. So before you jump in buying a new property, take the time to explore, understand the local markets, and protect your nest egg. Now, before we sign off, why don't you comment below, are you team rent or team buy? I'd like to see which housing option you most gravitate towards. And next, hit that like and subscribe button to turn on the notifications so you'll be notified when we drop our next video on the biggest culture shocks we experienced adjusting to our life in Mexico. Until then, hasta luego from Mexico.